Hi, I'm Brian Ritterman. Welcome to the Open Book. Let me ask you this. If God is perfectly just, doesn't it make sense that he would only hold us accountable for things we freely choose to do? But what if our choices aren't really free? What if everything we do is already determined? This is where things get tricky, and it's what I've been thinking about recently. If our choices are predetermined, whether because God planned them or because he knows the future so perfectly that they can't change, then how can we be responsible for those choices? How can we be more than just automatons, following a script we didn't write? The question of free will is tied directly to God's justice. For God to judge us fairly, we have to be able to make real choices. And if we're not truly free, how can he hold us accountable? Think about it. If you program a robot to act in a certain way, you wouldn't blame or reward that robot for what it does. It doesn't have a choice. Now, some theological views describe humans in a similar way. Either our actions are fully determined by God's will, or they're locked in because God perfectly foreknows them. Either way, it's hard to see how we're really free, or how God's justice can truly be fair. To get really to the heart of this, we need to talk about time, and how it shapes our understanding of God's knowledge and our freedom. So there are two main ways people think about time, and they have huge implications for free will. The first is A theory, or tensed time. This view says that only the present is real. The past is something that's already happened, and the future hasn't happened yet. It's open. Now, B theory, in contrast, or tenseless time, sees things differently. In this view, all of time is like a block of ice. All moments in existence, past, present, and future, exist in this block. If you could step outside of time, you'd see every moment laid out at once. Time doesn't flow, it just is. The difference between these views is enormous when it comes to how we think about God and free will. If B theory is true, the future already exists as part of a fixed block of time, then nothing can happen differently. It's all set, including your choices. If God sees this block of time perfectly, then he already knows everything you'll do. In fact, every moment in time, every sinful or righteous act exists in this block and will for all eternity. Free will isn't possible in this theory, not even for God. He, like the block, must be completely unchanging. Now, instead, if A theory is true, if only the present is real, then the future doesn't exist yet. It's open, full of possibilities. In this view, God's knowledge of the future would be more like knowing the probabilities of what could happen. It's not fixed. This opens the door for both free will and real interaction between God and us. And this is where quantum mechanics comes into the picture. At the smallest level of reality, the universe doesn't seem deterministic. The dual slit experiment, for example, shows us that we can predict the probability of where a particle will land, but we can't predict with certainty what any single particle will do. This suggests a universe built on possibilities, not certainties. And if God designed the universe this way, it makes sense that he designed us in a similar way, not as predictable machines, but as beings with real creative freedom. It's part of what it means to be made in his image. So then, how do different theological views handle all of this? Let's take a look at four major perspectives. Calvinism says the future is fixed because God decreed it. Every action, every choice, is part of his sovereign plan. And in this view, free will is redefined as doing what you want. But even your wants are determined by God. The challenge here is obvious. If God decreed everything, including evil actions, how's he not responsible for them? Arminianism argues that God foreknows the future without determining it. But this creates a little bit of a different issue. If the future is fixed in God's mind, it's hard to see how he can act dynamically in response to our choices. How can he respond to something that's already settled, that he's already seen? Molinism offers a middle ground. It says that God knows what every person would do in any possible situation and chooses to create the world where his purposes are fulfilled or maximized. But for this to work, humans actually must be predictable. We must be entirely predictable, like machines. Input, environment equals output. So is that really free, libertarian free will? Finally, there's open theism. This view says that the future isn't fixed. It's open. God knows all possible futures and their probabilities, but doesn't see one settled timeline. This allows him to interact with us in real time, responding to our choices and working dynamically to achieve his purposes. Now, the first three, Calvinism, Arminianism, and Molinism, all share one thing in common. They describe a fixed timeline. Whether it's fixed by God's decree, his foreknowledge, or his choice of the best possible world, the outcome is the same. The future's locked in, which has big implications. In a fixed timeline, nothing can happen differently. Not for us and not for God. Every choice and event is predetermined. God can't act differently than what's already settled, and our choices can't be truly free. It raises tough questions about God's freedom and whether our lives are anything more than a script. Open theism offers a different picture. It says the future is open and full of possibilities. God knows every possible outcome, and he uses his infinite wisdom and his maximal power to achieve his purposes. He knows the present perfectly, every detail of the universe as it exists right now, and he knows our hearts perfectly. That's why he doesn't need a fixed timeline to accomplish his will. He works with us, responding in real time, guiding history towards good outcomes. And here's the part that I find beautiful. We were created in the image of God. That means we were designed for freedom. Just like God is free to create, to love, and to act, we've been given real freedom to make choices. That freedom is part of what makes love possible, real love. Real love requires the ability to choose. So, in conclusion, I don't believe God made us automatons. I believe he created us in his image with true freedom, not as random machines, but as beings capable of love, creativity, and responsibility. Science, philosophy, and theology all point to the same truth. Our choices are real and they matter. If you've been wrestling with questions about God's justice, time, or free will, I hope this gives you a starting point. But these ideas aren't just philosophical. They're deeply biblical. On this channel, we've already started exploring how open theism aligns with Scripture, and we'll be tackling even more of these scriptural questions in future videos. So if this resonates or even challenges you, stick around. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to check out my other videos for deeper dives into topics like original sin and God's justice. And as always, keep exploring the open book. There's so much more to discover.